Delighted to be talking in synchronous time for the first time with Dr. Mary Rice, who's been an email friend of mine for quite some time, at least the past few years. But thank you for joining a Zoom meeting with me.
Yeah, it's great to be here today. So
Well,
exciting.
glad to have you. Glad to have you in the Words Images World meeting space. And delighted to talk about your work, which I've been following for some time. For folks out there that are less familiar, you're an associate professor, is that right?
Yep, I'm an associate professor of literacy at the University of New Mexico.
Yes, yes. And author, researcher, I believe I've jumped in on some books of yours before, and you've been kind enough to do the same for me. And so glad to be talking in this space about education and digital literacy. And I think it's a meme-focused talk as well.
Yeah, today we're gonna chat about memes.
That's right. That's right. So I need to turn this into a meme. I really need to do that for our talk. Before we dive in and discuss that a little bit, I am curious for listeners out there about your background in education, how you got interested in literacy and the digital world that is part of Words, Images, and Worlds.
Goodness. Well, I was a classroom teacher for about 10 years. So I started out teaching English as a second language. And I had students from lots of different places in the world. So lots of multilingual students from many different countries. And I also taught the reading support classes. So students who needed help with their reading, and then also they kind of used it as a weaving lane between support services for students being served under IDEA
Hmm.
in the United States, so special education. And then I also did general education English and honors English as well. So at one point I had five different preparations during the day.
Yeah, yeah.
So classes with 40 students in them sometimes. And so, but it was great. It was good times. And then I went and got a PhD at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. And I was interested in sort of technology and literacy support and some of those things. And when I went to Kansas, they said, "Well, you should talk to Don Deschler because he's got the big grants in that area right now." Because he'd gone and testified in front of Congress and things like that about adolescent reading, and but he'd also just was a part of a federal contract for the Center on Online Learning and Students with Disabilities.
Mm,
And so I went and had a conversation with him, and he hired me. He was actually very excited about my work in ESL because he had lots of language linguistic data that he was interested in terms of analyzing the linguistic properties of the curriculum that was online.
mhm, mhm.
So I'd done some of that, and then I was also really interested in the roles and responsibilities that people take on when curriculum moves digital and things like that. And then I just started doing that. My dissertation was about how English language arts teachers in rural settings make curriculum with various kinds of like technology device initiatives.
Mhm.
So teachers had laptops for all the students. Some teachers just had really nice computer labs. Some schools just had like, well, we're just going to give the teachers sort of whatever they want in terms of devices in their classrooms and devices for themselves. And some were working on some of those one-to-one device initiatives, which is really like, or bring your own device, which is really the kids and self. And so then what is the context? So alongside whatever the infrastructure they had in the rural space. So I had just been thinking about a lot of these issues sort of from a like a multi-discipline, multi-area space for really quite a long time because especially with my teaching career and the way that I moved across departments, like I just have a hold of a lot of threads.
Yeah, yeah. Well, wonderful threads to weave together. And I, of course, knew about your background in English language education. So I was going to change the shirt, but then I didn't. It was designed by one of my students, and it's for the Spanish club at the school where I'm teaching. So I thought that would be an appropriate shout out as well to that aspect of your experience.
Yeah, well, in New Mexico, we have more. We have a lot of students who have Spanish heritage as a has Spanish as a heritage language, and actually maybe even prefer it over English. So it's one of the highest Spanish speaking states in the country, and also we have 19 indigenous groups. So the 19 indigenous Pueblo groups, three Apache groups, and the Diné or Navajo share the border between New Mexico and Arizona.
Yeah,
And there's other groups as well, but those are sort of the large indigenous nations, and they are also they have languages. They've been here, they are here, they're going to be here,
hmm
and so we, I think it's important to acknowledge and think about multilingualism and everyday life, and not as a like, oh, how would as an unusual thing, but instead as the norm.
Agreed, agreed. And of course, you and I share the interest in languaging across digital formats and multimedia, multimodal ways of communicating. So I think that leads us nicely into memes. How did you get involved in looking at memes, and what's been the background of this work?
Well, when I was a classroom teacher, still in about, gosh, it was probably 2003 or four, I found this book called Thought Contagion by Aaron Lynch. And he wrote it in about 1998. And it's a book about the study of memetics. Because, we talk about memes as like those, as people understand them as the funny little pictures on the internet, but it exists, the concept of memetics existed before that. And basically it's about how ideas and beliefs spread
Mhm.
through the theory is that through a natural selection process. And it's not always like the fittest or truest ideas that, or even the most helpful ones, but the ones that are best at propagation for whatever reason. And it's actually really an interesting science, or an interesting, like, sort of, it's a provocative way to think about how information travels in digital space that's sort of bigger than the idea of visual image, although visual image ended up being a really important way in, as the internet has grown, to think about how memetics, how image in the large sense gets traveled, right? So like how do people like take on ideas, and like why do people take on things that, like in terms of a traditional or a usual conception of like what's a fact and what's not, like how come that all went out the window for some, like some different way of conceptualizing what we think is true. And
Mm.
I just thought it was really an interesting I just thought it was really an interesting book. And so then I started to think about how to like incorporate some of those ideas in terms of like sort of mimetic truth, and talking with my students about like some of the texts we were reading, and like how people come to believe what they believe, and like and sort of those sorts of things. And then when memes then sort of came all over the internet as those images, then that was the way that I thought about them, is like, oh, this is a way not just to like make people laugh, but this is a way to distribute, propagate, prop up ideas. Like there's an advancement of, this is a thought contagion.
Mm. Mm.
So there's a sort of a superficial sort of thing that's going on here. And then there's community message or group, going on. And it's a signifier of that. So, and if you look at research about how those images are spread and who spreads them and in what communities, then you find that that would be the case, that um, they come from who knows where, right? So that's one of the things about them that's really important is that a lot of things we think about in terms of like online information evaluation is that we're supposed to source, right? That's historically what we've been taught as teachers is source, source, source. I remember back in the day when they were telling us, like .com is bad, .org, could be good or
Hmm.
bad, .gov is good, like
Right.
like some of those sorts of things. But if you're talking about a meme, then you don't know where it came from. And so then it's more important to think about like who's sharing it, what their motivations might be, some of that sort of stuff. And the paper that I wrote, one of the ones I wrote most recently and published was about the Bernie Sanders at the inauguration theme
Hmm.
meme. And in that meme, like I noticed that actually it was some of my more conservative friends that actually started sharing it more, even though Bernie Sanders is a progressive figure. And so then, like, what do we make of that? Why would that happen? And Bernie Sanders is already very memeable just because he is a Statler and Waldorf kind of grumpy figure. He's got the sort of posture of I'm going to ask you again. He
Hmm.
likes soup. So he was already just super, super memeable. Anyway, it's called a fanon, not to be confused with like Frantz Fanon, the critical theorist, but like a fanon is a group of people that just sort of sit around and think about how to group together. He's got this group of characteristics that make him very memeable anyway. And then it just took off and
Hmm.
see it again. So because like you think, oh, that's over, like, oh, everybody forgot about that. But the Bernie Sanders at the inauguration, that cutout of him appeared with the Kate Middleton
Hmm.
um, piece where we were trying to smoke out Kate Middleton when she disappeared earlier in the spring. You could find her, and so then Bernie Sanders with the children to make fun of the fact that we couldn't. That it was identified that that picture of her with her children on the British Mother's Day was photoshopped. So, and again, like you can laugh and be like, ha ha ha, there's Bernie and those kids, but like, no, there's other things to be learned from that.
Hmm.
About think about Bernie as this most progressive person with a royal family, the juxtaposition of old and young. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
so like there's all kinds of ways to like think about that, and read and understand that with kids. And then again, like what's the thought contagion that is supposed to underlie that and so forth. And so that's sort of how I'm getting into it. And then also I'm, coming toward like how teachers can use this and how teachers can think about it. And there's basically endless sources of like memes too. Because also it's important, the way that I talk about memes is not an individual image is a meme, but the whole canon is the meme. So
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
Bernie Sanders at the inauguration meme is the sort of the kit and caboodle of those images it has no ending, has no beginning.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that overlaps and overlays with the Kate Middleton meme of all of those images of Kate missing and where would she would be in the speculation about what that would be and what happened to her. And also could overlay with something like I really like the Larry the cat from Downing Street.
Hmm.
So, the cat that's been there longer than most of the prime ministers.
Yeah.
And that overlapped with the Speaker of the House of the United States when there was issues there, like maintaining a speaker because the prime minister and the Speaker of the House are better correlates than the president and the prime minister. And
Hmm.
so I mean, so there's the way in which they can cross over into each other too, which is part of the contagion part and a part of how again how ideas get spread, they get propagated, they cross contaminate, if you want to think about it that way. So
Yeah. Yeah. When I'm thinking about like remixing as we know it as a term and uh, how you have that corpus of images that come from one image and then generate other images and that talk to each other. So really interesting analysis work there that you can do.
Yeah. Well, Bernie at the inauguration was also in the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago amongst all the boxes of classified documents.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I mean, it crossed into that meme. I thought that meme was really interesting because it also that one got taken over by academics because who completely took it out of the political context and said things like student portfolios to be graded, and
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
recaptioned it, or um, list of materials needed to apply for this academic position.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which is hilarious to anybody who's ever tried to apply for an academic job.
True enough.
So it didn't matter what you thought about the classified documents. It doesn't matter how you feel about Donald Trump, like just the stacks of those boxes in the bathroom, and then all of a sudden, then academia just took that and was like, this is not the IRB is not going to accept this as a data storage plan.
Right.
Funny. And how again, like this groupish behavior, this group meme, and the way that it can get taken up and taken over is extremely important to think about. And again, like it just comes from the ether. It comes from nowhere. The same
Hmm.
way like it's very difficult to trace a virus or like it just trying to find the zero on that is very difficult. And so it throws out away a lot of our traditional notions of like information sources.
Hmm.
You have to instead go think about like what meaning is trying to be made here. How's this trying to influence you? How does this make you feel? Like, what are the aesthetics of this? Like you have to, there's other layers, so thinking about its technical construction, the social and media context all of a sudden become like much more important than things like the crap
Hmm.
test.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, if I'm a teacher out there, what would you recommend that I think about as far as what I should consider about memes, and maybe even other forms of digital literacy and communication? Any particular beginning steps or ways of thinking about that?
Mhm. Well, I have the way that I usually talk about it when I go visit schools or when I work with teachers is to sort of focus on a layered visual analysis where you would think about the technical construction of the meme. So you can ask those questions about how this is how this is who made how this is made. So like there are lots of meme generators, for instance, where very easy to do. There are also ones that you can do things with a like more advanced software products, but the ones that look less fancy actually tend to travel farther. The same
Mm-hmm.
way that like less formal videos tend to actually look more authentic and kind of tend to have more gravitas in our digital world,
Hmm. Hmm.
various reasons. And a lot of times teachers will be like, oh, we're going to make memes for the day. And they'll focus on those technical elements, but then not necessarily push along other layers. So, because there also are these sort of aesthetic pieces about like those how those pieces being arranged how they are contribute to the aesthetics of what is going on. So, um, how come Bernie juxtaposed in this place? Like, what does this say? So, like when putting the Bernie Sanders meme alongside Bert and Ernie, right? Because that was the thing in the campaign is Bert and Ernie is Bernie.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, so why put him in the middle? You could put him in the middle, you could put him on the side, you could put him upside down, right? So what does that actually mean for the aesthetics where he is in the scene? So not just putting him somewhere, but what does that mean? And then the more aesthetic responses piece about like, how do I feel about this? What is this supposed to be making me think? Like, what if you put Bernie with flames around him versus
Mm-hmm.
Bernie on a cloud versus Bernie in black and white? Like, what are the evocations of emotions that you're supposed to be feeling based on how how these things are designed? And then thinking about the media context as well. So, like, why is this on Instagram? Is it on X, Twitter? Is it on some other social media? And that's really important because we all used to be on two or three different social media sites, and then we've balkanized quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit in the last little while. And so like stuff doesn't travel as far as long as it used to, but some things just are able to get into WhatsApp groups and on the Discords, and into some stuff still goes on email, and like some stuff will just go round and round and round on X still. And it's interesting to think about that. Like, where is this? Who is sharing this? What groups is this coming out of? What I think is interesting is when like when people that you wouldn't think would share the same thing would. Like, I thought progressives, conservatives, everybody across the political spectrum was sharing that Bernie Sanders meme, regardless of how they felt about the inauguration, the results of the election, etc. And so
Mm-hmm.
then, like, why, right? And then that will push you into thinking more about the social context of, um, like what is the thought contagion? What is the
Yeah.
overall? And so, and in the case of the Bernie Sanders meme, then I've really thought about how it served as a really nice way to let people in to the inauguration in a time when not a lot of people could go, when people had mixed feelings about it, when politically there was a lot, like, people are they're polarized and they're calcified.
Mm-hmm.
Every election is close. It's been that way in my lifetime. First presidential election I voted in was the 2000 one I decided
Same. Mm-hmm.
by the
Same.
Supreme Court. And it hasn't really been super different since. So, and even now elections for dog catcher are just razor thin. And so, like, when you get those moments where everybody thinks the same thing is funny, the great eclipses and the northern lights and things like that, then then sometimes those things can be very, very memeable, but then also people like to express displeasure with memes as well, or they like to send hidden messages. There's some flap about a flag being upside down right now, and one of the justices' houses. I actually didn't know what that was supposed to signify, which tells you what that's not a community that I was a part of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and that goes to show the about symbol and meme, right? Like, and the group think and the group membership involved. And so those things are important for teachers to really like get through all those. You don't have to do all the layers every time, and you don't have to do them in a particular order. But to me, more than one layer is important. And
Mm-hmm.
to not just have this say to the kids, all right, I don't know what to do in class today, or let's do something fun and let's
Right.
make a team. Like, to me, like, doing more than one thing is, in terms of thinking about media context, aesthetic responses, the formal aesthetics, the technical construction. Do more than one thing, and definitely the students have to talk about it more.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
having them source is really not a good use of pedagogical time. And then also, like, I think it's very important to consider, um, to bring to the young people's mind the idea that these digital texts are co-created with human and non-human.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
non-human, what I mean by that is that this stuff is created, like, sometimes with images that were at the hands of human creativity, but have been somewhat removed or remixed, like we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But that non is sort of is quoted or parentheses or caveated, but that this is a co-construction and not like something that just came out from nowhere, but it's also not the usually derived from one direct person.
Hmm.
And really helping students understand that sometimes it's mathematically generated and sometimes just one person pulled things and then pushed it out, but that increasingly, like with digital text, that this is human, non-human cooperation, co-creation is a really important concept.
Yeah, yeah. Any particular resources that you would recommend that listeners check out as they're exploring these ideas? You have a number of publications about this, so I want to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, I've got an article that where I talk through the different sort of layers of visual analysis, and I don't know if you post those on with the thing.
Glad to.
So you can do that. It's called Making Meaning with Memes through a multi-layered approach to visual literacies. But also, um, if going to and looking at practicing with visual artifacts in places like just going to your local museum,
Mm-hmm.
like the St. Louis Art Museum they've got a great website, for instance. So um, a lot of places will. So Molly Bang, if you've ever, I'm sure you've recommended that to people before, has a great book called Picture This about visual analysis that has like another way to think about visual tools and to get teachers started. That's pretty straightforward. PBS actually has a good series called The Bigger Picture with Vincent Brown, where they
Hmm.
go look at photographs and they do historical context of them. So, and that really helps with sort of that social context layer. Um, there also there is the Smithsonian, the National Museum of the American Indian, has a Native Knowledge 360 series, and they have some stuff about visual images too, and it's good about for historically contextualizing um, different aspects of Native knowledge and colonization. So like there's some interesting things about dressmaking and decoration and how those function as visual texts. There's also stuff about graphic novels and
Always a fan. Always a fan.
comic art, which is, I'm sure you have a lot of people who participate in podcasts do stuff like that. If you sign up,
Mm-hmm.
they'll send you what's coming up and you can sign up for it and do it. A lot of stuff is free, some of it is not, but a lot of stuff is free to attend. And so those are good places to just go learn more about some of that stuff, especially for thinking about how to socially contextualize things with students. And so those are my big ideas.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I am tempted to ask how memeable I am, but that's sort of like asking how much like Bernie Sanders am I, just following the line of reasoning in our conversation. So I don't know that I want to ask how memeable I am. Is that a question I should ask, do you think?
I think so. So I really like the idea about which Muppet are you?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Because I think that's sort of related. So like I always thought of myself as sort of a Janice because I've the long hair and
Oh yes, yeah. Was it Beamer? Is that the one?
oh yeah, Beamer.
Yeah, yeah, I relate to that. I relate to that.
You could be Guy Smiley, because he's a host.
True, very true, very true. At least for this context, that would work really well. All right.
So
Well, Dr. Rice, so great to finally meet you in synchronous time, and glad to have a conversation anytime about literacy and creating, and I'm sure that we will overlap in our work at some point again.
yeah, we'll do fun stuff anytime. So and if people want to reach out to me at the University of New Mexico, I'm easy to find. So I don't know if you can put my email if you want in the resource.
Absolutely. Glad to.
And so, but thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah, thank you.